All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar from the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. My name is Kim Fulton. I lead the coaching and leadership practice at Third Factor, and I'm also a Smith MBA alum, and I will be your host for today's session. Before we jump in, I just want to acknowledge that Queens is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and we are so grateful to be able to live and work and play on these lands. Just a bit of housekeeping before we jump into today's fantastic discussion. It's International Women's Day this week, and what better way to celebrate than with this discussion about this incredibly important topic of the women's health gap. Over the next hour, we're going to dive into this vital link between women's health, business success, and economic growth. Now, the session will be recorded. So after today's session, you will receive a link to the recording in your inbox. Please feel free to share that recording with other people in your network. And the chat is also open. So please head into the chat, let us know where you're joining from today, and share your thoughts throughout the discussion. After the initial discussion with our panelists, we'll be opening it up to Q&A from all of you. So please submit your questions for the panelists using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you put your questions into the chat, we may miss them. So if you can put them into the Q&A function, that'll make sure that they get seen, and we will get to as many questions as we can in the final portion of our session. You can submit those questions at any time throughout the discussion. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's incredible panel. First up, we have Lisa Wityak. Lisa is a partner at McKinsey & Company, and she leads the firm's thinking on digital analytics and Gen AI in the retail sector. She has more than 15 years experience in the consumer space, and since joining McKinsey in 2012, she has focused on commercial and growth strategies, building digital businesses, and improving customer experience for clients in retail, consumer goods, and direct-to-consumer sectors globally. Lisa also chairs the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee in Canada, which oversees programs for more than 850 McKinsey colleagues, and she is a passionate advocate and change leader in women's health. Next up, we have Laura Williams. Laura has built two highly respected firms, both Williams HR Law and Williams HR Consulting, which provide proactive human resources law and consulting advice that is designed to minimize workplace challenges, maximize employee engagement, and achieve team and organizational objectives. She's not only a business leader and proactive HR lawyer, but also a strategic HR and EDI consultant. She's a workplace investigator, an educator, a keynote speaker, and a leading voice and highly sought after expert. Her mission is ultimately to help leaders recognize that human-centric people management strategies produce game-changing results. We love that. Laura has been appointed as an equity advisor to numerous institutions and corporations and has served several years on various boards of directors. And finally, direct from the Smith School of Business, we have Elspeth Murray. Elspeth is an associate professor. She's the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Social Impact, and CIBC Fellow in Entrepreneurship at Smith School of Business. She has expertise in strategy, change management, and entrepreneurship. And if you're looking for a good read, she also is the co-author of the best-selling book, Fast Forward, Organizational Change in 100 Days, along with Peter Richardson. She advises several tech companies and is working on many digital transformation projects focused on creating an analytics culture. Prior to joining Smith, she's also worked for several firms, including IBM and Canadian Tire. So Lisa, Laura, Elspeth, welcome. It is so wonderful to have you all here today, and I'm so looking forward to hearing from you throughout the discussion. So let's jump right into it. And Lisa, I want to come to you first because McKinsey has done this really incredible research into the women's health gap and the impact that it has on our workplaces. And so just to kind of ground us all in the conversation, I'm wondering if you can help us define the health gap. I think, when we think about women's health, we often think about just those women-specific conditions like menopause and fertility, but your research looked much more broadly at women's health. So I wonder if you can help us just paint a clear picture of what is it that we mean by the women's health gap.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and thank you so much for having me. And March is often my favorite time of the year because we talk about women, and we should talk about women much more broadly throughout the years, which is a bit of a crusade that we've been on. So, as Kim, as you mentioned, we published together with World Economic Forum two reports actually, one last year, the other one that debuted in Davos this year, that started analyzing and putting the fact base and groundwork behind what is the women health gap. And to your point, the definition is maybe not as obvious because we all know that women actually live longer than men. So there is this perception that we should be healthier and there should be less challenges. But what we aim to do is to look at the fact base around the top conditions that contribute to almost 90% of disease burden, not just the early death, but also the debilitating conditions that impact our ability to engage with communities, in the workplace, with our careers, and understand what interventions actually work well, what conditions are over or underrepresented in women, and how does it holistically impact our quality of lives, not just duration of lives. And what we found is pretty depressing, to be honest, because we found that women live longer, but we spend in Canada specifically, if I take Canadian numbers, we spend 24% more time in poor health, which means that we are suffering from conditions that are, some of them are just much more prevalent in women. Some of them have not a great treatments that address women specifically, or there might be a barrier to accessing those treatments. If we take on a global scale, that has $1 trillion impact on the GDP. So we're missing $1 trillion. In Canada, it is 27 billion. It is a very significant number. It is around 3% of per capita GDP per woman. And if you translate it from like dry numbers to actual lives lived, this means that women are not able to achieve their full potential and strive for their dreams because of the health that is holding them back. Plus, they're also caregivers. So there is a bit of a multiplier effect to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And incredible when you throw out those numbers, like trillions of dollars globally in terms of an impact that it has when on the women's lives and their productivity. And one of the things I found interesting in your research is you really highlight this issue around data being a big part of the problem, because when we don't have good data, it leads to delayed diagnoses and not understanding how different treatments impact women differently. So I'm wondering if you can tell us just a bit about that role of data in the women's health gap and what we can do to improve the data around women's health.
That's a fantastic question. I'm very much a data-driven person. And what we found through this research is that the documentation of women's health is inadequate. To start with, we don't really understand how women biology work. We consider women to be a small man, but women are not small men. We function differently, and it goes way beyond just reproductive health and periods and being able to get pregnant. One thing that is kind of very clear that we don't study women enough. So, for example, for the treatments that currently are on the market, 50% of them do not have sex disaggregated data. And actually, in US, it was mandated in 1993 that the sex disaggregated data need to be collected, and women has to be included in the studies. But actually, the reaction of our bodies to treatment could be very, very different. And in the places where we have data, it is much more disadvantageous to women. So in the 50% that we have data in, only 16% women are advantaged. In the other places, it's not. The way that the clinical guidelines work, they are also often developed on a male body prototype, like whether you're talking about the heart attack symptoms or how asthma manifests and some of the comorbidities that come with that. Women are not tested often enough. And obviously you mentioned there are women-specific conditions like endometriosis or PMS that would really be understudied and underinvested. So that's kind of the data, like the reason why I'm really focused on the data as a first tenet, because it starts off the cycle of how we treat this in the context of all the healthcare system, how we train our our healthcare professionals and how we make the investment decisions in the women-specific areas.
Yeah, and it's so interesting what you say about investment decisions, because Elspeth, I want to bring you into this as well. I know you're a big fan of good data and analytics as well. And I'm curious because, when it comes to innovation, it's not hard to see how difficult it is to really fund investment in women's health if we don't have the data as a starting point to really quantify the problem or be able to measure the impact of potential solutions and opportunities that we're looking at. So I'm curious, what are you seeing in the tech sector around data, and how are tech companies kind of responding to this challenge?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, for me, data is everything. And I think Lisa and I share sort of a common view on that. So I find it fascinating to look at the data gap just in the research and the products, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, that are being created. But I think it's worth also looking at data at an individual level. And for everyone who's on the call, I have to tell you that both Laura and Lisa have one of my favorite data collection devices, which is an Aura ring. And Laura doesn't have hers, but Lisa agreed to be a hand model and put hers up. It's just like the coolest thing that sort of hit the market. And I think, Laura, you said you got yours about 5 years ago. I'm not here to kind of plug the company per se, but thank you, Finland, for having some entrepreneurs who created this. But it is sort of a classic data acquisition device and uses some really neat non-invasive technologies to measure everything from heart rate to temperature to heart rate variability, tracks your sleep and a number of different metrics associated with your sleep, and sort of aggregates all of that to create insights for you as an individual. So we've been talking about data in aggregate for women, but what about that, N of one? And maybe Laura will comment a little bit later about kind of the game changer aspect of having, your individual data to give you some insights into what you need to change to better take care of your health. Which is I think another piece of the puzzle here. I mean, there are many things that the medical community can focus on, but I think that opportunity for individual action is critical. And then, Kim, we can talk a little bit later about the whole femtech rise in these tech companies that are using this data to create all kinds of solutions for the various problems that Lisa was talking about, everything from PMS to better managing menopause. The list goes on. I think we're just at the beginning of that wave. So yes, data is everything.
Yeah, and so interesting, like you said, that it's going to obviously take time for these systemic and institutional changes to catch up to collect the broad data that we need, but that there's these individual solutions in the interim that people can be tracking their own data and bringing that to their medical community and getting support that way as well.
Yeah, and pushing from
Yes.
the bottom, as opposed to waiting for investors or anybody else to get it, but really start to highlight and bring to the forefront, the massive opportunity for better health outcomes, better productivity, better GDP, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, I'm really curious to get your take because I know you're working with lots of different organizations, and it seems like this topic of women's health is gaining attention. We're hearing more about it kind of anecdotally and in the media. So, what are you hearing in your conversations with companies? Is women's health something that they're thinking about? Is it a concern? What's kind of on the minds of business leaders?
Well, first, let me say happy International Women's Day week to everyone, and I'm honored to be part of this esteemed panel. From the discussion that we've had to this point, women's health in the context of policy development, wellness, benefit entitlement has been gaining traction in the realm of workplace. What does create some threat to it, even in light of all of the, at least the data we have as to the value and contributions that women make in the workplace context, on boards, in leadership. Yet now we're in a very, I'll just call it peculiar time that I've kind of dubbed the era of equity backlash. So we have had organizations that have taken some very progressive steps to institute equity strategy, equity initiatives. But right now, certain of them, I would say a number of them, are either second guessing, feeling a little bit weak-kneed, or outright aborting, abandoning, or suspending their equity initiatives because of the backlash and the blowback we're getting, a lot of it coming from the south of us. But that's also enabling and empowering people to take certain positions that are against equity and advancement of equity within the workplace. You know, as recently as this weekend, and in just the wave of announcement after announcement of these major corporations that are aborting their equity initiatives, claiming that they're still going to, you know, pursue being fair and accessible and open, but the initiatives that they've had in place, that in many cases they have come to by virtue of assessment of where there are barriers to access to opportunity. They're essentially rethinking or suspending them. And it was interesting this weekend, there was a LinkedIn post that came up in my feed of an organization that's been lauded for being at the vanguard of progressing equity in the industry, in their industry, and they announced that they're suspending their equity initiatives. And so someone wisely put in the comments, does that mean you're going to give back all of the awards you received based on your equity initiatives in your industry? But in any event, it's a thing. It's a real thing. As recently as this morning, I was conducting some corporate training for a board specifically on how they're going to move forward with their equity initiatives, which this organization really meaningfully instituted, not performatively. But they have some very practical challenges, and the practical challenges include that they are under contract with the federal US government, and now the procurement rules are changing, and so they are grappling with, well, we don't want to lose our contract, so what do? We want to still internally, signal that we're, moving forward, but externally we may need to change the messaging. So, this has been, and when we're specifically focusing on, advancing women's health and addressing women's health issues that need to be accommodated, particularly in the workplace, I have seen them gain steam, and particularly with some of the issues that have been for some time kind of destigmatized to talk about, such as providing, certain types of wellness benefits and breastfeeding rooms or lactation support, fertility benefits, certainly anything related to pregnancy. So we've had some progress, but those that were moving things forward, and there were a number of companies that were tackling the more complex issues such as menopause, perimenopause policies and such the like. I was hopeful that there would be more progress in that direction, but I do feel that we might have a bit of a setback, at least in the current times, as a result of the backlash that we're currently in.
Okay, so something companies are thinking about, they've made some progress, but given the current state of things and the world that we're in the moment, we might be kind of stalling out a little bit, is what it sounds like.
We might be stalling. Well, I would hazard to say, based on the conversations I've had, and I'm privy to many boardrooms, I know that equity is in sharp focus because there are some practical, bottom line related and perception optics issues that organizations are struggling through right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, Lisa, I'm curious for you to kind of paint the picture for us of why should companies be concerned about this? Like, those are some very real challenges that Laura outlined. And yet in your research, like you're pointing to some very real economic impacts when we ignore women's health. So what can you tell us about the case for why companies and governments as well should be concerned about this?
Yeah, I'm very much, Laura, with you on a bit of outrage around the kind of step back. And I think there is a very pragmatic case for women's health. So it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also wise and prudent and economical thing to do. I already talked about the impact on GDP. Just by like for Canada, it is around $30 billion of annual GDP impact if we start closing the women's health gap. Just for comparison, the tariffs that were imposed are a $90 billion impact. So we can cover a third of the tariff impact that is talked a lot about just by investing in women's health. There is also a case for $1 to $3 investment. So if you invest $1, you get $3 payback on a national level if you are investing in women's health. And then some of obviously my clients that are working south of the border as well, they are looking at their D&I policies and how they communicate. But ultimately, it is a huge unmet need of a very important customer demographics, because more than 80% of healthcare decisions are made by women. And not addressing this population actually sets you back in terms of your potential and going forward, like and leaning in. I'm happy to talk about D&I that is also close to what I do on how the diverse teams perform better, how the workplace is kind of more effective. And we know that by not addressing women's health, you will not be able to achieve equity, parity, or actual productive workforce going forward. Whether you're talking about your first promotion and women getting much less promoted to the first managerial, like for every 100 men, around 80 women get to the first kind of step in the promotion ladder, to the C-suite and VP levels, where it is the prime of our careers, and menopause and perimenopause often comes into place there. So without resolving that, we will never kind of get close to the parity and equity, which we know has economic and very pragmatic impact. So I always say it's not just the right thing to do, but it's the great investment that the companies and governments can continue making.
Yeah, and so important that so much of this health burden is borne by women in their primary working years. So women are trying to go to work and balance all these different challenges at the same time. And Laura, I'm curious, like when women are trying to go to work and they're balancing these challenges, they've got the physical challenges of a health burden that they're dealing with, the emotional weight of dealing with all that, sometimes the financial burden when we talk about things like fertility treatments and things like that. And yet it feels like these topics are not widely discussed in our organizations. Like there's still some stigma around it or uncertainty about, is it even safe to bring these conversations up? Like what could the consequences be if I do? So it feels like women are just sort of bringing these health issues into their workplace and just sort of powering through, trying to be a superhero and get it all done. So correct me on that. Is that true? Is that not true? What is sort of the culture around health and these topics for women employees in their organizations?
Well, it is somewhat organization specific. So, organizations that have created the kind of the safety around having those kinds of discussions. And I will say in the overall scheme of things, they are the vast minority. You may have circumstances where, productive discussions around women's health can take place. But for the vast majority of workplace contexts, for individuals, including women, and also taking into to consideration where they fall in kind of the generational spectrum. So women that are kind of older, and I can say this, I can take liberty of saying this because I try to pass myself off as a redhead, but I'm actually a silver fox, been doing this for 30 years. So I will say that particularly for older women, that have normalized just putting one foot in front of the other, sucking it up, showing up, normalize the discomfort, normalize the mental health impacts, frankly, from some of what they're enduring. They're not so quick to bring bring these issues forward. Plus, I can say, kind of in a kind of adjacent realm, if you recall in the late 2010s, when the Me Too movement and harassment protections were in sharp focus, a lot of women were facing retribution and diminished opportunities or barriers because a number of men, and I had a number of conversations with male leaders who essentially said, I'm not comfortable having one-on-one conversations with women in the workplace because I don't want to face false accusations. So just kind of by kind of extension to this topic, some women feel that if they bring forward issues that relate to, their women-related health issues, that they're going to face barriers because naturally and misguidedly, a lot of organizations feel that if they have to accommodate these types of issues, number one, there may be some disingenuous claims, and number two, there are going to be productivity issues. But there's really no difference in tackling accommodation of women's health issues than for a lot of other issues, such as how organizations have been much more adept in accommodating mental health, which is, we've had the benefit of destigmatization over the past several years. And so, hopefully with all the data, with all of the discussion, including in just the broader social realm with podcasters now talking about menopause, there's a lot more conversation about women's health issues just generally, and not exclusively menopause, but of just women's health generally. Hopefully we'll be moving the needle towards more destigmatization, where we can have these conversations and we can have the incorporation of and recognition of the health impacts into our accommodation policies and processes within the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a really important addition in the chat, Leslie said, long live silver foxes. So just want to make sure that we get that support and recognition in there. So we've talked a lot now about the challenges, and the challenges are not small. There's a lot that we're up against here. But if we start to pivot a little bit now and talk about like solutions and what can we do, Elspeth, with your work in the tech sector, and you mentioned this rise of femtech, what are you seeing from an innovation and tech perspective that gives us a little bit of optimism?
Sure, I'll come to that, but I cannot help myself. I have to comment on, the just a bit on the previous discussion. And it does, I find it very discouraging, the DEI, all of a sudden now we have to hide all this stuff. But, to me, imagine if someone said to you, like, half your workforce could be more productive 3 days a month. And I think Lisa in the McKinsey survey, it's sort of drilling it down into specific numbers. Wouldn't that be something that you would want to focus on? Wouldn't you want to be keen to look at, benefits for your employees? So that's number one. Number two, and then I'll come to the femtech stuff, is, we talk a lot about women health related issues, but many of these things affect entire families. So, if you're a couple trying to have a family and you have fertility issues, like that's just not a you thing as a woman. That affects male employees as well. So I think there's a huge lost opportunity here to just focus on women, but also think more broadly about the whole thing, which brings me to what I think is some really great news. There is this whole field called femtech, which is really using technology to create businesses that address women's health issues. Many of the things that we've been talking about here. And I'm just going to look at my notes for a sec to make sure I get the numbers right. But roughly, I think in 2025, this is a $55 billion industry, and it's been growing, and it continues to grow at just over 10% a year. So when we look at big opportunities to address women's health issues, there is a lot of upside. I think depending on which study you look at, it's 132 billion by 2032. So I think that's really good news. People are piling in, entrepreneurs are piling in to create businesses, to everything from creating, apps that help you create better information, to websites that answer every question you might ever have around menopause, to all of these businesses that are pulling data off of these wearable devices and saying, oh, I can tell you when you're ovulating, when you're going to have a great shot at getting pregnant. Or we're talking about the Aura Ring, the readiness score. You're sleeping really badly. You are not at your best. So, and I joked, like, push off those critical meetings for a couple of days when, you're up and ready. And I think that that sort of thing affects everyone. North America is by far where the hottest action is in femtech, driven largely by the United States, but Canada is number 5 in the global kind of femtech space. And interestingly enough, neck and neck with India. So I think that is really great news. I promise I won't talk about tariffs and how we need to do more ourselves, but we have a great head start here. And not surprisingly, a lot of the businesses thus far have been focused on, pregnancy and nursing and a few other things. But there's lots of space, and many of these companies are now springing up to address, PMS, perimenopause, menopause. There's this super cool business out of tech business out of Israel, where they actually use waves to block the pain receptors in your brain during your period, if you've got cramps. So it's a non-pharmaceutical. So it's just, it's so interesting to look at. People are recognizing the business opportunity. They know consumers want it, us, silver foxes, through kind of all of those stages, and investors are starting to recognize the opportunity as well. So crassly, there's money to be made. And less crassly, there are better health outcomes to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's crass at all. That's the key to all of this, is that, like you said, it's not just the right thing to do. There's real business opportunity and productivity associated with all of it. And Laura, what about organizations? What should they be doing to move the needle and support employees? There's been a few people sharing their experiences in the chat of, dealing with different health issues and coming up against workplaces that weren't particularly supportive, didn't understand what they were going through. So what do organizations need to be doing in this space?
Well, one of the things that organizations should resist is moving too quickly, right? You have to be very intentional when you're adopting any type of policy that could involve, well, first of all, some subject matter that some individuals may not feel comfortable bringing forward and talking about, but also that has serious and consequences from a legal perspective. So when we're talking about personal health information, of course, there are all different types of legal implications around ensuring that you may have consent to certain information. There are accommodation obligations. There are privacy implications. There's all different types of different aspects of it from a legal perspective that need to be understood. But really, that kind of folds under the first thing that I think is important, and that's education across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Senior leadership, the organization has to be fully aligned and bought into the why it's important. And oftentimes the why gets intercepted by, early resistance around, well, if we do all of this, we're not going to be productive. The good thing is, in the era we find ourselves in, which is the post-pandemic workplace is that, you know, a lot of organizations have had to rethink what productivity it looks like and how to properly manage productivity when we're dealing in many cases with, you know, hybrid working environments or exclusively remote teams. So we now think about more metrics around, you know, results driven work rather than, you know, punching a clock or having to be seen. And so we really have to understand that, you know, accommodating any need within the workplace that connects to any of the 16 grounds in Ontario, but, you know, other similar number of grounds in other provinces is we have to appreciate the fact that, you know, accommodation doesn't mean that you can't be productive. So we have to evolve our thinking around that. The other thing that's really important is instituting or implementing changes around progressing women's health, like any, you know, equity initiative, does give rise to resistance. And we're already in that era of pushback and resistance and retrenchment. So what needs to happen is to effectively move certain changes forward is you have to anticipate and include resistance management as part of advancing and progressing the change. And resistance management when it comes to equity involves preempting the predictable resistance that will always emerge, and it's just based on, and neuroscience supports this, that as human beings, unfortunately, we're wired to think scarcity and not abundance. So we start thinking, okay, well, if certain people are granted certain opportunities or accommodations, that means that I'm going to lose out somewhere. So again, baking in the solid why and preempting the resistance that is very predictable is what can get organizations properly out of the blocks when they intentionally tackle this realm of complexity within the workplace.
Yeah. And are you seeing any companies doing particularly interesting things around changing that culture and making it safe for employees to bring these topics forward?
Well, absolutely. I was actually part of an event last year where the I believe she's either VP of HR was sharing, and all, you know, they were public with it, of course, what the Globe and Mail was doing with respect to incorporating women's health and women's health needs into their accommodation policies, et cetera. Very progressive. There are other companies, I mean, accessible through Google search that have been at the forefront of advancing women's health accommodation in particular, like Metrolinx and SimCore, and there's a number of articles out there. And for those companies that want to see what it could look like, being mindful that this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. You really have to do your own internal assessment and ready your workplace environment. But, you know, there are organizations that do publish their policies, and that can be helpful for organizations to start thinking about what this can look like within their context.
Yeah, awesome. So in just a moment, we'll start opening it up to Q&A. So for everybody in the audience, if you've got questions for our panelists, please do submit those using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before we get to the questions, I just want to come back to you, Lisa, for kind of final thoughts based on the research that you've done around, you know, like recommendations. Again, what can companies be doing, or anything about that'll help us see the optimism and the hopefully bright future related to this?
Yeah, thank you. And I think there is, like, whenever I talk about this topic, I'm both outraged and encouraged, because we see in data, and even in the poorly collected data that we have, how far we need to go to achieve health equity and stop women from getting kind of into the trap of the health gap. On the other side, I feel like we are at the cusp of generational opportunity to change it. There have been a sea of change with fertility lately. And I hope that we will similarly break the ceiling and like break the silence cone around menopause, perimenopause, what we are able to talk and bring to the workplace. I think it was mentioned a couple of times that men sometimes tend to be scared, but in reality, whether we're looking at parental policy or healthcare policies or coverage, actually, once women break the kind of the glass, everyone benefits. Everyone has their ability to bring fuller selves and fuller kind of stories to the workplace. So this really encourages me, and the fact that our conversations are kind of amplified and we keep talking about it and keep bringing the new innovation. There is a great kind of Canada Femtech community, right? Like that Rachel Bartholomew leads. Like we are, like I feel like we have it on the tip of our fingers to actually kind of break the ice here. I think where it all starts with awareness. So my advice to everyone is get a couple of facts that especially get under your skin, that especially outrage you personally, and start talking about them. Start bringing it up in a first safe space, and then extending the radius of coverage. Everywhere we are working and we are part of powerful companies, communities, we need to start looking at the data that we're collecting and are able to dissect based on gender specific, but also ethnicity and other background specific. And are we actually seeing in the data and collecting the data where differences are matter? And again, women are not small men. We need to kind of recognize and embrace it fully. With this, the closing research gaps and making sure that we have access to sex-appropriate care, and we start expanding the definition of sex-appropriate care, whether it's accommodations that we can make in the workplace, thoughtful accommodations, for example, for perimenopause, menopausal women, on kind of intensity of the meetings that they can take, flexibility of the calendars, some of just ergonomics of our workplaces. How do we really wire it into everything that we do as companies? And finally, for those who have VC or any other funding mechanisms, thinking about how do we devote more to this unique financial and economic country opportunity and company opportunity, more of our investment. So this is maybe a longer list than just one bullet point, but there is one maybe two takeaways: raise the awareness and take care of yourself.
Yeah, great takeaways. And look, we like that there's a long list of opportunities and things that can be done. So that is really great to hear. So I want to turn to the Q&A. We've had some great questions submitted from our audience. And one of the first ones that I definitely want to tackle is around menopause and perimenopausal policies, because I know both in the Q&A and in the chat, a lot of people have been mentioning this topic. So interested to know, which companies are doing it right when it comes to these policies. Where can employers look for best practices? And I'll just throw out there that I know the Menopause Foundation of Canada also has a playbook for employers on creating menopause inclusive workplaces that talks about a lot of things like culture and policies and things. So a great resource that folks can check out. But maybe Laura, I'll come to you. Like any companies that you're seeing that are tackling these policies particularly well, or other resources people should be aware of?
Well, I named three. I mentioned the Global Mail, SimCorp, Metrolinx. There are a few companies that have, been very public in advancing women's health issues within the workplace context. But that's not exclusive. Those are the ones that just come to mind. I'm always a little loath to say this is a great policy, adopt it, because again, policies have to make sense, just to be practical, within the workplace context. So you can't be just, if you were to adopt, let's say, policy from a company that's very progressive, has a very defined, expansive equity strategy that they've been working at for a while, and you're still in the blocks or thinking about getting into them, that policy, it could cause more risks then be helpful to the organization because of all the things that the organization may be committing to that it can't possibly sustainably do or do it all because they're not there yet. So, you've got to be very thoughtful. And I'm glad to see that Amber did post the link to the Menopause Foundation of Canada so that, people can explore the playbook. But just some considerations for as it relates to policy development. It may be that certain, women's health issues are incorporated by example into an existing accommodation policy. That could be progress for a company that's just starting to educate itself, get information, understand the data and the need within their particular local workplace or space. That might be a way. And that might be referencing, getting more into the impacts and implications of certain conditions such as, menstrual health, could be fertility, pregnancy. We're talking about menopause, perimenopause, and mental health concerns that are linked to, let's say, hormonal changes. There's all different types of things that might be specifically considered and called out in that type of policy that is not, wasn't incorporated before. So, policy development can be tackled from, an almost an evolutionary approach. So you may start somewhere practically that represents where you are in an organization to then perhaps maybe standalone policies that specifically speak to the complexities, the entitlements and obligations that organizations have as it relates to women's health.
Awesome. And Lisa, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just building on what Laura said, that it's not one size fit all. I'm surveying some of my clients are in UK. I'm currently dialing in from London. And around 5 years ago, I had this conversation with a woman executive in one of the top leading banks actually in UK. And she was, I don't want to bring menopause because it makes me seem weaker compared to all my kind of fellow men. And some of those symptoms of like fatigue, brain fog, they are not associated with the executive decision making. Exactly, right? And there's the stigma of the more we talk about it, we actually might hinder the progress. So 5 years forward, UK as a country, they invested a lot in building societal awareness, which was not led by a single company or kind of me as a representative of a company, but talking about what is menopause? What are the different changes, physical changes that we know are happening in the bodies? What are some of the counter arguments? Like how do we start including that in the health coverage plans and start training kind of NHA front lines? Because in a typical textbook, it is 2 paragraphs that are devoted to menopause in the whole studies of them. You can be a medical student and talk about menopause exactly for 0.5 minutes, right? Like it is incredible. But they have triggered and they have started publishing the guidelines similar to Menopause Foundation of Canada. But it's all kind of government-led. And it led to a sea of change within the companies because women started coming forward and starting discussing it. And the type of accommodations, to Laura's point, are very similar to some of the other, like you can think about mental health, or you don't have to talk about it as much, but you know that you can take it. So I just encourage to kind of also think about some step changes that are beyond one company that help everyone rise with the level.
Awesome. And Elspeth, I'll come to you. There's a couple of questions here sort of related to the tech side of things. So both any examples of Canadian companies in the femtech space that are doing particularly interesting things if people want to check them out. And as we think about tech and data with things like Oura Ring, et cetera, is there any concerns that we need to have around privacy and sort of data security around those?
Sure. So I think, and Lisa mentioned this, I mean, there's a great kind of femtech community in Canada. So really all you have to do, and kind of my advice is, take 20 minutes, hop online, Google femtech companies, market map, subcategories, and which I did this morning. you will find all kinds of interesting companies that have sprung up to address any number of women's health issues. So, I mean, I've got like a list of companies that are really cool, but there are many more that I don't know. I have had students, for example, who have a company that they created called Sprout Family. So it's designed to help couples, start the family making process. So it's sort of a clearinghouse for information. But, and Laura, you would appreciate this. There you go. You can find these in a quick search. But it's really a benefits company as well. Because in their research, what they found is that these very productive people kind of in the sweet spot of their careers. And it's not just for women, it's for men as well. It's like and all kinds of different incarnations of folks who are trying to have a kid. So that's just but one example. And I think I saw in the chat, it doesn't take very long and you can find out all the cool stuff. Now, I wanted to come back to the Aura Ring. My guess, and we could check back in 2 years, is that there will be other devices that will gather critical biometric data that can then, and that data can be shared with companies who, are HIPAA compliant or secure, private, which is very easy for companies to create now. And then they can do cool stuff with your data. So I have fewer concerns about data and privacy from an individual level perspective than I would have had a few years ago. And the good companies, they get that because we should all be concerned about who's doing, what with our data. So it's a bit of a long answer to your question, but I felt so much more optimistic about solutions to some of these challenges than I did before I sat down, for 20 minutes. Because you don't have to suffer in silence through menopause in the old kind of suck it up and yeah, you're going to have bad days, fake it. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm probably going to have bad days. And holy crap, look at all the things that I can do to limit the effect of those bad days. So it's incredibly empowering. But I wanted to come back to one of the points that Lisa made in, again, a survey that I was just looking at. The problem is awareness.
Mhm.
We just don't know there are solutions out there. So again, my call to action is sit down, Google Femtech Canada, solutions to health challenge X. I guarantee you will feel better.
Amazing. Love it. And Lisa, one question maybe I'll come to you on is, was there anything in your research about how we can incentivize companies, research organizations, governments, et cetera, to ensure more diverse data sets? So back to this question of having the data and sex disaggregated data in the first place, anything about incentives in place to help make that happen?
Yeah, and Canada has been less than 30 years on it, where we require to include women in all the trials. I think there is a very important kind of push to institute it as a policy. I think there is a big risk that in US that by sleep, which means that for a lot of treatments and trials that are happening in US, there might be less access to sex disaggregated data or even inclusion of women. And I understand, like, women are really messy. Like, we have our cycles, we have hormones, we're complex. It is much easier to test on a simple male model that kind of doesn't have all those considerations of fertility and how it impacts the future kids and like everything. But it is an absolutely critical topic. I work a lot with also life sciences companies, the ones that are coming up with all those treatments. And for them, this is a kind of a bit of a dilemma of you go with simplicity, but actually you leave behind a whole population of like half of the globe that will have less effective treatments. And for now, a lot of them, like the most encouraging words that I'm hearing from them is like, we are actually all female health companies, because when they start looking at their portfolio of the treatments that they have, majority or like 50-60% is actually used by women. So if you take any immunocompromised or autoimmune diseases that are very much female focused, and like a lot of the tip of the spear are actually women health problems. So I think there is like a bit of a coming together of mandates and policies that just have to be in place, with the recognition that you are leaving on the table and leaving behind like an enormous opportunity if you are just not looking at women separately.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got about just a couple minutes left here. We won't get to all the final questions, but I will say there's a bit of a theme in the questions remaining, which is in the realm of what can we do? What can we do to accelerate change? What can we do to gain allies in this process? So to wrap it up, maybe just sort of a rapid fire, I'd love to hear from each of you on your one sort of practical thing that folks on the call can do coming out of this session to help themselves, help their organizations, help broadly on closing this women's health gap. And Lisa, I'll start with you because you're off mute.
Okay, so one, think about yourself, especially like as you're a woman, or your people around you. And if there's something that is bothering you, like in your own health, or there's some like a woman nearby that kind of you feel like needs this advice, just ask them to get this thing checked and not relentlessly pursue it, even if they are first and second and third doctor visit are not encouraging. You have to be persistent. And I would say two, pick up a fact and talk about it. Sorry.
We're concerned about your health right now, Lisa. This is real-time women's health happening in the moment. Why don't we come to you, Laura, and then we'll give Lisa a chance to catch her breath.
Okay, certainly. Well, there's so much to say. If you're looking for the one thing, I'll share with you, I think, what a lot of organizations are overlooking. There's a solid case, we know, and I was mentioning to Lisa right before the session that I've relied on the seminal research that McKinsey and Company has done, right from, I think it was from 2014, 2015 onwards, on the case for diversity. There's another case now that organizations are overlooking, and that's the case against setting aside, suspending, abandoning the equity commitments and progress that you've made within your organizations. And, very heavily putting my legal hat on, what's being overlooked is there's significant exposure. So if you can't get people to do the right thing, because it is the right thing to focus and incorporate women's health and acknowledge the value and contribution that women have from an impact perspective on the bottom line and so many aspects of organization success, is to recognize that you create exposures to liabilities by aborting or abandoning your equity progress, because what a lot of organizations did, even if it was performatively, to institute their equity initiatives, they conducted an assessment of barriers. And the equity work that they've done essentially addresses those barriers. So now when you say nothing to see over here, what you're acknowledging is that we are allowing, and in some cases, systemic discrimination that's creating disadvantage for certain groups. So there's going to be a lot of legal repercussions that we haven't quite even seen yet in the coming days that might help us get past the stalling of progression when it comes to addressing equity generally and specifically women's health in the workplace.
Awesome. And Elspeth, your last takeaway.
Sure, I'll keep it really short. Share the data, share the McKinsey report. It's truly awesome. The facts are unequivocal. Women's health issues are really opportunities for employers, for society, and for individuals. And the second point that I would make is, find a femtech company, support that company, buy from that company, tell your friends about that company, amplify their message, and that can make a huge difference.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Elspeth, Laura, Lisa. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, for sharing your experience with us. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and from looking at the chats and all the icons that are flowing, I think everybody has really enjoyed it as well. So thank you for that. From the Smith School of Business at Queen's University, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for this discussion. The recording will be in your inboxes, and the next webinar will be coming up soon. So keep an eye out for more information on that as well. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. Wishing you all the very best and a very healthy, very prosperous future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.